Lincoln was born in a small log cabin in Kentucky on February 12, 1809. He grew up in a world of hard work and simple joys. His family wasn't rich, but they made up for it with love and hard work. Nancy, his mother, was a tough person with a kind heart who taught him to be honest and work hard. Abraham loved the times he spent with his mother reading the Bible by candlelight. When he was 9 years old, his mother got milk sickness, which made him feel lost and alone. She tried hard to save her, but she couldn't. This made him stronger. The harsh winters, the death of his mother, and the hard work he had to do to stay alive made Abraham strong and determined. He became a future leader because of these events, which turned hardship into strength and pain into drive. No one knew that this boy from a simple wood cabin would one day change the course of a whole country. When he was young, Abraham Lincoln lived in a wood cabin. After his mother died, he had to deal with many problems. His dad got married again, and his new stepmother was nice. But Abraham really missed his mom. Books gave him peace and helped him forget about the hard things in his life. He borrowed books from anyone who would give them to him. To get a book, he would sometimes walk miles. It was something his grandmother often said, "Abe is so eager to learn that I've never seen a boy so eager to learn." It was harder for them to learn to write because they rarely had money for paper and ink. Abraham was creative. He used charcoal to write on wooden planks and practiced his letters until they were neat and easy to see. When he finally got paper, he would write over and over on the same sheet until it was full. His determination was put to the test many times, and working in the fields for long hours made him tired, but he didn't mind the hard times. His unwavering drive and thirst for knowledge made him into the great leader he would become. Abraham's desire to learn and his willingness to work hard opened doors for him. He took on many jobs to support his family and pay for books. He ran a store, ran the post office, and even did land surveys. He learned about the problems and hopes of different people through each job. Abraham's reading and life events shaped the way he thought, felt, and believed. The idea of a government of the people, by the people, for the people became very important to him. It was these ideas that made him want to get involved in politics. He became a member of the Illinois state government for the first time in 1834. Abraham Lincoln was humble, self-educated, and humble, but his fire and dedication made him stand out. Those in the legislature couldn't help but admire his honesty, clear thinking, and well-thought-out points. These early events, the jobs he had, seeing wrongdoing, and his first steps into politics, shaped him and got him ready for the big role he was meant to play. He had no idea that this young man from a log house would go on to become one of the most important leaders in U.S. history. In the beginning of his political career, Abraham learned from his losses and never let them bring him down. In fact, they made him more determined. They taught him that the way to success was often long and full of setbacks. In the same breath, he learned that failures were actually chances to learn, grow, and come back stronger. Abraham's early years in politics were not easy, but they were also shaping him for what was to come. That experience made him a strong and resolute leader who would not give up when things got tough, but would instead rise above them. People should never give up because his trip showed how strong the human spirit is. Abraham Lincoln was a very important person in American history. He loved Mary Todd very much. When they met for the first time at a dance in Springfield, Illinois, it was clear that they loved each other. They got married in 1842. Since Mary's family was from the upper class, which is very different from Abraham's humble beginnings, their marriage brought both happiness and new difficulties. There were some things they didn't agree on, but they loved each other very much and worked through them together to grow. Joe, their second son, died in 1850, not long before he turned 4 years old. This loss had a big effect on Abraham. He was very sad and wondered why life was so unfair. Abraham found comfort in his work, his family, and his dream of a better world, which made him more empathetic and helped him understand how painful death is. The story of Abraham and Mary's love gave him new depth. It showed that behind the famous man was a man who loved deeply, hurt deeply, and was strong enough to keep going on his journey, no matter how hard it got. But even though he was having problems and had lost loved ones, Lincoln found the strength to get back into politics. His duty was to speak out against slavery because the country was about to go through a terrible crisis. Because of what he saw and felt in New Orleans and his natural sense of right and wrong, he was a strong opponent of this cruel practice. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 caused a lot of debate across the country because it let people who lived in the western regions decide for themselves if they wanted to allow slavery. There was no way for Lincoln to do nothing about it. He saw it as a threat to the freedom and equality that the country was founded on. He went from being a humble lawmaker to a national figure, a leader, because he was so against the spread of slavery. He was no longer just a politician, but a voice for justice and a beacon of hope for those wishing for freedom. No matter how hard things were, he could see the way ahead, and he was getting closer to his fate, which would change the course of American history forever. By the late 1850s, Abraham Lincoln was a well-known figure in the fight against slavery. His powerful talks were heard across the country, and many people agreed with his points of view. But as things changed in his country, he began to think about running for president. He was moved by his love for his country and his desire to uphold its founding ideals of freedom and equality. Abraham Lincoln, who was from Illinois, had to deal with a lot of problems while running for president. His stance against slavery caused a lot of disagreement among people, and those who were against him used this to their advantage by calling him a rebel who wanted to change everything. They tried to make him look less trustworthy by pointing out that he didn't go to school and came from a poor background. However, Lincoln did not have the political power or money that some of his opponents did. What made him strong, though, were his beliefs, his words, and his growing image as an honest leader. While he was running for office, Lincoln traveled a lot and spoke to people personally. He held debates and discussions and made his positions clear. Many people changed their minds because of how passionately he spoke. He told his fans, "This is not about me, this is about us, our country. It is about standing up for what is right. We cannot let the shadow of slavery divide us." Lincoln knew that his journey to become president was about more than just winning a political race. It was about standing up for what he believed in, fighting for a cause he cared deeply about, and protecting the future of his country. As the final count came in, it was clear that many Americans had been moved by Lincoln's words. Some people were happy to hear about Lincoln's win, but he knew that the real work had just begun. The nation was on the brink of crisis, and the responsibility of guiding it through the looming turmoil rested on his shoulders. The United States was on the verge of war when Lincoln became president. The issue of slavery had caused a lot of disagreement. Because Lincoln was against slavery, the Southern states thought their way of life was in danger. It was easy to feel the stress, and the possibility of a fight was very real. A month after Lincoln was sworn in, the storm finally broke. South Carolina led the Confederate states in announcing their separation from the Union. This was a clear threat to Lincoln's presidency and the country as a whole. Despite the dire situation, Lincoln did not waver. The start of the war made him very sad, but he also knew that the values he stood for, freedom, equality, and unity, were now in danger. He gave an emotional speech to the country in which he said, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Passion may have strained, but it must not break our bonds of affection. We shall get through this crisis because we are one nation." Even though the country was divided and the future was unclear, Lincoln stayed at the helm, ready to lead his country through the rough times ahead. The Civil War was a difficult time for President Lincoln, as he faced numerous challenges in his presidency. One of the most significant battles was the Battle of Bull Run, which resulted in a crushing defeat for the Union. This loss showed that the war could last longer and be more fierce than expected. Lincoln was greatly hurt by this loss and knew that the army needed a better plan and leaders with more experience. Because of this, he made General George McClellan the leader of the Union Army. But this choice was hard to make because McClellan was skilled, but also too careful, and he often hesitated to attack the enemy. Despite these challenges, Lincoln never lost sight of the human side of the war. He was deeply affected by the deaths, the broken families, and the destruction caused by the war. Each letter from a fighter or their family member was a powerful reminder of how much the war cost. In these challenging times, Lincoln showed himself to be a leader of great strength and compassion. He worked hard all the time, often late at night, reading war plans and messages. He faced criticism and resistance, yet he stood firm in his commitment to the Union cause. During the Civil War, Lincoln had to make a choice that would shape his presidency and change the course of American history. Slavery was the main reason for the war, and it still hadn't been fixed. Lincoln knew it was time to make things happen. He made a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation on September 27, 1862, after giving it a lot of thought and talking to other people. It said that if the rebel states didn't join the Union by the beginning of the new year, their slaves would be considered forever free. This decision came with a lot of political and personal risks. The last Emancipation Proclamation came out on January 1, 1863. Lincoln felt a profound sense of responsibility as he signed the document, knowing that he was changing the course of millions of lives and shaping the future of his country. That didn't happen right away, but the Emancipation Proclamation was a turning point in the fight for freedom and equality. Lincoln's strong desire to end slavery was shown by this, and it gave millions of people hope. The war got worse over time, and Lincoln saw how terrible it was for the country. Each fight killed more people, caused more loss, and broke more hearts. Even though it broke his heart to see his people suffer, he knew he had to do what was right. Amidst the problems, Lincoln stayed determined in his goal. During the war, he took over for generals, made battle plans, and even went to the battlefields to be active. The way he treated his advisors and military generals showed how strong of a person he was. Even though Lincoln was in the middle of the war, he was also depressed. The stress of being president, the cost of the war, and the loss of a loved one all made his depressive periods worse. His natural toughness showed through as he turned to books for comfort and his work to stay strong as he worked to protect the Union. During his sadness and depression, Lincoln showed that he was not only a great leader, but also a very strong and resilient person. During the Civil War, Lincoln gave a strong speech at the dedication of a cemetery in Gettysburg. In it, he talked about his hopes for the future of the country. He spoke of a new birth of freedom, envisioning a united country where equality was not just a principle, but a living fact. The words he spoke gave a tired country hope by reminding them of the ideas they were fighting for. The Gettysburg Address wasn't just some words, it was a message of hope. People in the crowd felt Lincoln's words, which were sincere and full of passion. They painted a picture of a country that could be, one that would be stronger and more united after the war. The speech gave the country the direction it so desperately needed. The end of the Civil War was finally in sight after many long, painful years of fighting. On April 9, 1865, the Confederate General Robert E. Lee submitted to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. The news of the surrender spread like wildfire, and the next day it reached Washington, D.C. When Lincoln heard the news that the war was over, he let out a sigh of relief. But the joy of victory was mixed with the sadness of the lives lost, which showed how much peace costs. Coming soon after the end of the war was the 1864 presidential race, which would be another big test. The country was tired from the war, and Trump's political opponents saw this as their chance to take charge. However, Lincoln's leadership during the war had shown his unyielding commitment to the Union and the cause of freedom. When he was re-elected, he saw it as a chance to make his dream of a united country free of slavery and committed to the ideas of justice and equality come true. In his second inaugural speech, Lincoln talked about these plans and once again asked his countrymen to heal the nation's wounds by working together to make peace. Lincoln was hopeful and ready to lead the country to a better future, even though he knew there would be problems. But he had no idea that he would never get to see his big plans come back to life. Lincoln chose to go to a play at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865, just a few days after the end of the Civil War. But the evening would not end with laughter. It would end with sadness. John Wilkes Booth, who supported the Confederacy, sneaked into Lincoln's box and shot the president once. Lincoln was hit in the back of the head by the bullet. He died the next morning at 7:22 a.m. The country was deeply saddened when word spread quickly that Lincoln had been killed. Lincoln's life and untimely death became a symbol of giving up something important for the greater good. His biography is a thrilling and dramatic story that still inspires people today. The killing of Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War was a terrible blow to the country, which was just starting to recover from its losses. Right after the attack, there was a lot of sadness, confusion, and anxiety, and chaos broke out in the Capitol. In the end, John Wilkes Booth was caught and killed while trying to escape. Some of his accomplices were arrested, put on trial, and put to death. Andrew Johnson, as vice president, had to lead a country that was still split and hurt from the war. Congress, on the other hand, didn't agree with Johnson's plan for rebuilding, which caused more political unrest. When Lincoln died, people all over the world sent him sympathies and spoke out against his killing. Even with all the trouble, Lincoln's impact made his dream of a united country free from slavery even stronger. His work led to the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery. The country would continue to follow the ideals he stood for in the years to come. Following Lincoln's death, the U.S. had the huge job of putting together a country that had been destroyed by war. The time after the Civil War was called Reconstruction. It was a tough time for the American people, who had to show how strong and determined they were. The first steps towards Reconstruction were taken by President Andrew Johnson and then President Ulysses S. Grant. The Southern states had to be brought back into the Union, and the rights of former slaves had to be defended. It was a hard and often heated time. During this time, Lincoln's ideas and influence were felt strongly, giving the country direction and inspiration. The 13th Amendment and his Emancipation Proclamation made it possible for the 14th and 15th Amendments, which gave former slaves the right to become citizens and vote. Lincoln's ideas of freedom, equality, and togetherness were a guiding light during this difficult time. They strengthened the resolve to rebuild and heal. Lincoln was always there to keep everyone calm and tell them of what the country could be: a free, united, and equal nation. This was true even during Reconstruction. Many people think that Abraham Lincoln was one of the best presidents in U.S. history. He was very good at leading the country during the Civil War, worked hard to end slavery, and dreamed of a united and fair country. Although Abraham Lincoln was a famous person, he was known for being shy. This affected how he led and how he dealt with problems. His personality was calm and gentle, and he liked to listen more than talk. People looked up to him as a leader because he was patient and understanding, and they admired what he did. But it wasn't always easy for Lincoln, who was shy and quiet, to be a public figure in a leadership position. He often felt worn out by the demands of his job. It could be tiring to always have to talk to other people and be expected to be present and interested. Despite these problems, he handled them with grace and power, capitalizing on his natural strengths. Lincoln was shy, which made him a good listener who was willing to hear other people's points of view and follow their advice. This made him a leader who worked well with others and respected what his team had to say. He could also think deeply about things and look at all of them before making a choice because he could reflect in peace. Even though there were problems, Lincoln's cool demeanor and well-thought-out choices made things seem stable during a rough time in history. It was clear that Lincoln was a loner, which shows that leadership comes in many shapes and sizes. During his lifetime, Abraham Lincoln lost many loved ones, and each one had a huge effect on his heart. His sadness was always with him and helped shape who he was and how he ran the country. Lincoln was a young boy when his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, died in a terrible accident. After many years, Lincoln was hit by another tragedy. His sister Sarah died. It was very sad for Lincoln when she died, and he also lost his son Willie while he was in the White House. Even though he was very sad, Lincoln never let his personal losses get in the way of his duties. His ability to bounce back from such terrible events in his life shows how strong his character is. There was a huge amount of duty that came with being the leader of a country at war. All the news from the front lines reached Lincoln as president. He was told about every fight, victory, and defeat, and with each report, the tension grew. Millions of people's lives were changed by the choices he made. Lincoln had to deal with a Congress that was split, public opinion, and the day-to-day jobs of running a war-torn country at home. It was important to carefully measure and weigh every speech, policy, and deed. Lincoln showed an amazing amount of strength despite the stress. He stuck to what he thought was right because he had a strong sense of right and wrong and a strong desire to keep the Union together. He had to make tough choices and deal with criticism, but he never lost sight of the goal, which was peace and togetherness. When no one was around, the stress was getting to Lincoln. He often looked tired and worried. People look up to him as one of the greatest leaders in American history because he was strong and determined, even though he had a lot of duty. During Abraham Lincoln's leadership, his family was a source of happiness and comfort during the hard times. Lincoln felt at home in the White House, and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, helped him deal with his personal and political problems. Robert, Willie, and Tad, their sons, brought much-needed happiness to the Lincoln administration. Even though he had a lot to do, Lincoln always found time to spend with his kids. They would play in the White House grounds or listen to stories with him in the evenings. Lincoln ran for office with a simple but strong goal in mind: to join the United States so that freedom and equality were not just ideas, but real things. Since he came from a poor family, Lincoln was used to hard work and trouble. He knew how important chances were and thought that everyone, no matter their race or background, should have a fair chance to succeed. This idea became the most important part of his plan. As president, he led a country that was split not only by geography but also by ideas. The problem of slavery had become very controversial and had caused major rifts in American society. Lincoln saw how unfair things were and how badly things needed to change. Not only did he want to end the Civil War, he also wanted to end it by stopping slavery. His long-lasting vision was shown by the Emancipation Proclamation, a choice that changed the course of American history. Even though there were political risks and possible backlash, Lincoln kept working for freedom for everyone. In his famous Gettysburg Address, he talked even more about his vision, stressing that freedom and equality should be the country's core ideals. The movie, A Visionary's Dream, shows Lincoln's big hopes for America and how brave and determined he was to make these dreams come true. There were a lot of tough choices Lincoln had to make as the Civil War went on. It was a tightrope walk between right and wrong, success and defeat, and every strategic move came with a risk and a cost. The Emancipation Proclamation was Lincoln's most difficult choice. It would free millions of slaves, but could also make the war last longer. Painful Decisions is a book that talks about Lincoln's regrets, successes, and part in important strategic decisions. It shows how Lincoln's unwavering dedication to justice led him through the rough waters of conflict and disagreement, giving us a look into the mind of a leader who had to lead the country through its darkest hour. People all over the country heard the Emancipation Proclamation as the ink dried on it. It brought both hope and fear. Abraham Lincoln fought in the bloody Civil War and ran for re-election in 1864. There were questions about Lincoln's ability to lead and his stance on slavery, but he stayed strong, a tower of determination in the face of uncertainty. Strange things started to happen when Union troops started to win big battles and people's views changed. It was like the first rays of sunlight after a long, dark night. Hope began to shine. Lincoln saw more than just the war. He saw the future of a united country. After being re-elected, he had a new chance to talk about his dream of peace and togetherness. Lincoln started to make plans for peace, with the goal of healing the deep scars caused by the Civil War. To get the South back into the Union, not to punish them, was his goal. He said, "With malice towards none, with charity for all," which meant he wanted to bring people together, not divide them. Promising peace, talks about Lincoln's plans and hopes for peace. Reading this book will help you understand how Lincoln handled the tricky political situation while holding the future of the whole country on his shoulders. At the heart of this story is his strong desire for peace and togetherness. Everyone in the country breathed a sigh of relief when the Civil War finished. The news of the South's surrender spread like flames, all the way to the very ends of the country. Lincoln found some peace in the middle of all the joy. He was in the Oval Office and looked out the window at all the happy people. He was very sad about all the lives that had been lost and very relieved at the same time. But most of all, he felt hopeful about the future. He had been fighting for this final victory the whole time. Abraham Lincoln died on April 14, 1865. As people tried to come to terms with the sudden, unthinkable loss, a deep, profound sadness spread across the country. People in the streets huddled together in small groups and spoke quietly. Lincoln's death left a hole that could not be filled by anyone, even those who didn't agree with his views. He was more than just president. He was a light of hope. In A Nation in Shock, the scene right after Lincoln's death shows how shocked, confused, and sad the whole country was, and it's a heartbreaking way to end the story. Trains stopped running, stores shut down, and flags flew at half-mast across the country. The funeral for Lincoln, which took place in the White House, was a sad event. To say their last goodbye, men, women, and children with sad faces did so. People know Abraham Lincoln as the man who led the country through its hardest times, but he was also known for being honest, funny, loving to read, and tough when things got tough. This part of the human side of Lincoln shows these sides of his personality. It shows a man who, despite his problems, led with kindness, drive, and a hope for a better future. When Abraham Lincoln died, Mary Todd. Lincoln had a lot of problems in her life, such as unstable finances, tense relationships with her remaining kids, and people not understanding her. Even with these problems, she wrote her story, Mary's Sorrow, to honor her husband's memory. Friends and foes of Abraham Lincoln had different opinions about him. His friends often praised his kindness, honesty, and sense of humor. John Nicolay, Lincoln's personal secretary, said of him, "Lincoln has the kindest heart. He always wants to help." However, Lincoln's opponents saw him as a tough opponent. Jefferson Davis called him a determined and relentless man, and Stephen Douglas said of him, "He is a formidable opponent." His memory has touched many people and had an impact on generations that came after him. Lincoln's wise words about fighting for freedom and equality have inspired many world leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr., who used many of Lincoln's quotes in his talks. During the Civil War, even famous people from around the world, like Nelson Mandela, saw strength in Lincoln's determination. In the modern world, influencing generations shows how Lincoln's ideas and deeds still shape leaders and motivate people. People all over the United States and the world remember him in many ways. For example, his face is on the penny and the $5 bill and the tall Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Lincoln's memory lives on in the hearts and thoughts of people who still honor his ideas as a patriot. On President's Day every year, people remember and honor Lincoln's leadership and significant role in American history. Kids learn about the Civil War and how important Lincoln was in ending slavery by studying his famous Gettysburg Address and learning how his strong words affected people. This education keeps his memory living and encourages new people to fight for freedom and equality. Lessons from Lincoln. Looks at these important lessons from Lincoln's life so that readers can learn from and be moved by this great leader. Abraham Lincoln's steadfast belief in equality, strength, humility, and fighting for what's right are still important lessons for leaders today. Finally, Abraham Lincoln's life story teaches us a lot of important lessons about being strong, not giving up, having kindness, being humble, and fighting for justice. We should all remember to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's hard, because of his unwavering commitment to equality, strength, and respect.